Hi guys, it's Ideas of Ice and Fire, and today we're going to talk about one of the most mysterious characters in all of A Song of Ice and Fire, Melisandre. And I'm also joined in this episode by Chloe and Eliana from Girls Gone Canon. How's it going, guys?
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
We're super excited to be here, and we're super excited to talk about Melisandre, especially with that nice fictional show that we watch once in a while coming out in the last couple weeks.
Yeah. So that's great because we planned to do this before we saw that episode, but now after we had that episode and we saw her in the show, I felt this is it would be extra interesting to talk about her right now because of the implications that this could have for the books potentially. So while we're going to mainly focus on the books, we might reference the show here and there.
Absolutely.
Melisandre has always been one of my favorite characters just because ever since I was a little boy and I saw The Wizard of Oz and I was rooting for the Wicked Witch to kill Dorothy and get the slippers and take over Oz, I knew that I had a thing for the dark female type sorceress archetype. And Melisandre just stole my heart early on as a character because she's so interesting and mysterious. And there's so much about her that's just unexplained.
Can I ask a question, even though maybe this should come later? But do you
Sure.
want Melisandre's character to be explained? Do you want her to eventually be explicable?
To some extent, I don't expect George R. R. Martin to come out and be like, this is every answer to every single thing about Melisandre. But I would like some window into her past, into where she came from, and kind of a more definite idea about why she is so certain. For one, that Stannis is the one. And why is she, for one, so certain that R'hllor is definitely the one true god? Is that 100% indoctrination? Because we know that Melisandre has talents that come from other places. So she definitely does understand that there is magic other than the magic of R'hllor. So why is it that she believes so heavily that R'hllor is the one true god? Unless she thinks that all other sources of magic ultimately emanate from R'hllor or something like that. I'm just curious as to why she believes what she believes.
Yeah, it's really interesting because she comes from this background of slavery as well. We get that in her chapter very vaguely in Mel 1. And a spicy take, we might get maybe one more chapter of Melisandre's point of view, maybe, but I think this is all we're going to get to work with, you guys, not to disappoint you. But I think this chapter alone, I think George writing Mel 1 was a great way to kind of give her humanity, give her depth, show you that she's not just some fiery witch that wants to burn all these kids. She has a reason, and show that what she is doing she thinks is right. And he also gave that hint to her slavery background, and it leads you to think of how R'hllor has kind of been her salvation, right? You think of people that find Jesus, and she found her Jesus in R'hllor.
But I do think it's interesting because you've all been raising that question, right? That she does have that background of slavery, and she was raised to be a small slave girl in the Great Red Temple, which obviously means through R'hllor. So somehow it's a strange, interesting conversation that's happening within the larger context of the book, right? Of slavery, with the context of the things that are happening in Slaver's Bay, and of course with the whites and the others. And it's weird if R'hllor is her salvation if they stole her freedom. So it's something that I am having difficulty reconciling. I don't know, I feel that we will get other chapters of her because someone has to be our POV at the wall in the next few books, right?
Right.
Yeah, I agree. And then also, like I said about wanting a window into Melisandre's past, Melisandre could also be, through POV chapters, could also be a really interesting window into what goes on in the East and maybe some hints at what actually goes on in Asshai, because she says that Asshai is where she's from. And she also, like I said, has knowledge that's beyond the Priest of R'hllor. She has shadow binding skills. And then we know that shadow binders are somehow tied into the Mountains of the Morn, and then the city Stygia that's at the center of it. And people know that I get jittery when I think about this because there's a lot of Lovecraftian notes going on. So if we were to get some hints of that in the main series, it would almost have to come from Melisandre because she's the only one of these characters that has any kind of experience with any of these places.
So going back to what you said about Stigai really quickly, it's really interesting on what we learn in the world of Ice and Fire, that it has all these like complete similar parallels, but a huge contrast to what Bran sees in the Heart of Winter.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? In his dream in a Game of Thrones, it like causes fear in the hearts of the people. No people live there. There's no one living there. It's extreme opposite sides of the world. There's a source of like great power possibly there, hinges of the world. You got the ice wielding others and shadow wielding shadowbinders, and also Stigai is called the Heart of Darkness. So R'hllor's obviously followed Ashai, where the Heart of Winter is kind of like the great other and the cold ones. So it's just this obvious like opposite thing. Like people have also theorized that Stigai is the location of a big volcano, while Heart of Winter is like this huge ice formation. So I think Melisandre obviously has some sort of role to play in this Song of Ice and Fire, obviously, and this kind of like fight against the cold ones and the death.
Well, what's cool about that? I was talking about kind of like what was she sent by the Red Priesthood or not to go to Ashai and become a Shadowbinder. What's interesting about like the term Shadowbinder is that Melisandre says also that shadows are creatures of the light. Like these are essentially like R'hllor's tools, right? And so I think about that place in the Heart of Darkness and how it's kind of like shadowed off. And I think I said this before in a video several years ago, that it's a shadow place, but if shadows are creatures of the light, is it maybe R'hllor's place? Mm-hmm. And it does seem like there's a volcano there because it's ash. Mm-hmm. So I mean, if R'hllor, I don't want to get too tinfoily, but but like if R'hllor did have like a physical manifestation and he was like some form that existed actually on the planet, maybe he would be in the Mountains of the Morn, and then in that opposite place, the Heart of Winter, that would be the place where, you know, the great other could reside. Mm-hmm. So that it's kind of like a dualism thing. And then her whole religion is about the whole dualistic thing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But then I've gotten even crazier before when like exploring these concepts. And I've said that like maybe Melisandre went there, she found something that she could interpret as R'hllor, but maybe it was like some higher entity that was kind of just playing with her, tricking her into thinking it was R'hllor, so it could use her and manipulate her because it was in a conflict eternally with that thing in the north that she could interpret as the great other. So that's kind of like a Lovecraftian kind of spin on this whole thing. Mm-hmm. But like obviously I don't literally think that's what's going on. I'm just saying that's kind of like a cool way that it could be looked at.
Well, even the way that when she, you know, looks into the flames, what we got in her chapter in A Dance of Dragons, there's that passage where the Red Priestess shuddered, blood trickled down her thigh, black and smoking, so it's obviously this connotation to volcanic imagery, almost, you know, just like you were saying about the ash, how she feels the fires inside of her, it's an ecstasy, and she has these memories of her being sold, you know, Melanie, Lot 7, and her tears are all flame, and she drank it in, and she really just embodies that fire. So for her to come north, you were saying actually in one of your videos, I think it was a 2015 Melisandre video, that her powers at the wall are actually heightened, and she obviously has a harder power at the wall, and she gets more visions and more communication with R'hllor in the flames. So I wonder what that has to do, what that magical kind of boundary comes from.
I'm never going to now not think of my period as volcanic, but in terms of that idea of what she gained there and her powers being stronger at the wall, but just like what her powers are, it seems as though she paid a price. And in this, it's something that stood out to me in what you read aloud just now, is the shimmers of heat traced patterns on her skin, insistent as a lover's hand, and it's tied with all these ideas of her past. So a question that I've always kind of wondered about Melisandre is, does she have the tattoos that we see that a lot of the slaves within R'hllor'ism have? And it seems as though this is suggesting she does, and I wonder, like, is the price that she paid, since you were talking about how the Shadowbinders have to cover their face, and Stigai, like, did something happen or like mar her face, and she wears a glamour partially to cover that as much as the tattoos and everything else?
That's actually a way I hadn't thought about it yet. So that's really interesting to consider. And also another way that you can look at it, the way that I look at it, the way I look at this, well, perhaps I'm not saying this is definitely the case, but it seems like she might be constantly in pain. It seems like the spell that's maintaining her youth and her beauty is leaving her in consistent agony. And it's not just pain, but it's also pleasure. It's like all of it. Like the fire and the pain and the ecstasy is all the same thing, right? So it seems like she's literally burning on the inside, because like the blood is like hot and smoking. So it's like she's on fire on the inside, literally, and that's what's maintaining the spell. And she even says in this chapter that R'hllor spoke to his chosen few in the language of ash and flame and cinder and pain.
Well, and then you have with Melisandre on top of that, she is so connected to like sex to create magic, life to create magic, and obviously we have all of the sacrifice that comes with R'hllor and, you know, death for life. But the power of sex, the power of magic, and not to get real soft on it, but the power of love that comes into A Song of Ice and Fire, like it makes me wonder, like you said, Eliana, is this something she had to deal with already? Like when she was she sold and abused and passed around, and she suffered enough through R'hllor to become, you know, I hate that, but this mighty being from it with more powers than what your usual red priest or priestess would have.
Or she's like a radical, right? And she, like a radical within her religion, and she saw what she thought should be like the tenets of R'hllor and went off on her own pilgrimage or something.
I definitely get that vibe from her, because you can definitely see just from her POV chapter that she's extremely arrogant. But then at the same time, you also see a lot of her internal uncertainty, that she's not necessarily as sure as what she's presenting to the world.
It's interesting because you can also see those even in chapters that aren't hers, just a hint at it. Like within Davos's chapter, because I'm an expert on this chapter now, in this one scene where they learn that Edric Storm has been taken, she, as you were saying, shows so much arrogance, and part of it stems from her faith and the belief that what the Lord of Light says is right, and this is his plan, and that Davos is just a lowly smuggler who doesn't know anything. But at the same time, Davos realizes when he tells them that, I set Edric Storm free, and he's gone now. Like, good fucking luck, you guys. She shows a flicker of doubt, and Davos is like, realizes in that moment, he's like, she didn't see it in her flame. So you see that sort of fallibility in her as well.
For sure. And I feel like that's the point of the chapter. That's one of the points of this chapter too. And we were talking about before we started recording a little bit, like that synopsis on the back of that old A Storm of Swords book, right? Where it was kind of painting Melisandre as just like this evil sorceress that was manipulating Stannis. So it seems like maybe George R. Martin didn't initially plan to have this Melisandre chapter, and then he decided to put it in to humanize her and so that you can see her kind of for what she is a little bit better. And there's a lot of just subtle hints in this chapter as to certain things. Like for one, I like the fact that it says, well, that she says, I've studied my art for years beyond count. Because anyone that's paying attention to that line can see that it's kind of off. Because Melisandre, she doesn't look old. She looks young. And for someone to say, I've studied my art for years beyond count, that implies significant age. Right, and then also in that same chapter, you see what she can do with the rubies, with Mance Rayder. So you see what she can do as far as glamours, and we know that she's always wearing a ruby herself. So it's George R. Martin is telling you in this chapter she's not as she appears, right?
Well, and we get a ton of that in A Dance with Dragons, too. I mean, the main theme there is identity. You have Theon's chapters, you have Melisandre, and it's interesting because what she sees, especially with that heightened power when she's at the wall, the visions that she does see, you kind of get that look into how she sees them. They're just flame dancing, so it's really easy for her to misinterpret. She sees the towers by the sea crumbling. She sees shadows in the shape of skulls. She sees bodies locked together in lust, writhing and rolling and clawing, which I think that is like low-key, obviously dragons dancing, but also like probably Jon and Dany banging it out. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Literally, yes, we know what you mean. You just said it.
Just, look, being vague here. Wasn't going to go into some smutty details, Eliana, but
check out my, what is it, fanfiction.net?
My
An
AO
archive of our own, yeah.
My AO of the 7. You know, just gonna make it AO7 as in A Song of Ice and Fire theme. Yeah. It's interesting that, like, that's what she could see at the wall, but she always ends up seeing it wrong, right? She sees different misinterpretations. She thinks that Alice Karstark is Arya. She sees what she's looking for. So, like you were saying earlier, hearkening back to she's blinded, this chapter really gives insight to her point of view. It shows that, like, outside of her point of view, she's kind of this heartless wench that likes fire. And then inside her point of view, you realize she believes what she's doing. She believes she's doing it for a righteous cause. She believes... Maybe it's because she doesn't want to admit that she's wrong, but that Stannis is Azor Ahai, that he is the one that's going to end the long night that's coming, and she believes what she is doing is for a cause.
Well, yeah, that's a really good point. And then a lot of this chapter 2 is about perception, right? So I almost wonder to myself, reading all of this, if Jon Snow had looked hard enough, could he have seen Mance, right? Because I think about... like how she says the bones make it easier. Having something from the person makes it easier to do the glamour. And I wonder what is the extent of her power, because I remember when she's revealing it to Jon Snow, when she's revealing the glamour, she speaks a word, and both of them hear two separate words. So is that something magical, or does it have something to do with Melisandre speaking in a way that tricks the perception somehow?
I could see that.
Could be both. Regarding your question as to if someone stared long enough, would they be able to see that Mance was not in fact, Rattleshirt wasn't Rattleshirt, but was Mance. I think that we get an answer to that question in one of the Arya chapters that is in Dance, when the kindly man is explaining to Arya the 3 different ways that they do disguises. So first, he talks about mummery and, you know, using normal disguises like what we in the real world can do, right? And then he says that next after that are glamours, and that anyone with a sharp eye, or if they're looking out of the corner of their eye, the glamour can slip and they can see through it a little, like a faint trick of the light. It's a trick of the light is essentially how they explain what a glamour is. And that's part of why they need to steal the faces, so that even someone who is smart cannot see through it. And I think that's part of why Jaqen H'ghar, who is probably the alchemist, aka Pate, needs to steal Pate's face, because theoretically the Citadel is full of very smart people, and especially if he's working under Marwyn, who would be trained to have those sharp eyes and see something like that, or not necessarily trained, but be clever enough in the way that Maester Aemon is smart enough to see through Melisandre's glamour, because he can't see. He can feel that the glamour is fake and it's not the true light bringer. So I think that, yes, I don't know if Jon could, because Jon's really busy dealing with his, like, PTSD, and now he's, like, 16 years old and running a whole fucking military order / penal colony, depending on how you want to think of it. And as I always say, puberty is hard already.
Yeah. But we also get a lot of this, which, really interestingly enough, if you look at the Duncan Egg novellas, George is writing these kind of in line with the other books, right? So A Feast for Crows was written during the Sworn Sword. The Hedge Knight was written around Storm of Swords. You have the Mystery Knight that was written around Feast and Dance. So he wrote this literally around those books at the same exact time, and when he wrote that, he also put in Maynard Plum, who we later learn is, well, never revealed in the text, but it's obvious. It's Bloodraven. And she obviously sees Bloodraven in that one vision with Bran, kind of that whole fighting of the gods, right? You kind of think it's, Bloodraven is tapped into the Weirwoods, who also require blood and sacrifice, and they're kind of the northern gods, versus her with R'hllor that needs the blood and the sacrifice to create light. So it's interesting that George kind of put that echo in there to enrich Melisandre's plot, almost, to enrich that Melisandre chapter we do get in A Dance with Dragons, to show us about this magic and about these glamours.
Mm-hmm. So that's a really good point. So belief, suggestion, and sacrifice. So I would wonder. So it's to some extent Melisandre's power is based on suggestion. So I would wonder to what extent is her power fueled by her own belief, right? Does she need to believe in it for it to work? And then also sacrifice. That's a good point about sacrifice and gods. Because I've been reading American Gods by Neil Gaiman.
So good! It's one of my favorite books.
Right? And the one thing about gods is that they require sacrifice. It's what gives them power. So it's like, So it's the belief and the sacrifice and the suggestion that creates the gods.
And there's
right?
also that idea that they really are about that, like, not to talk about the bad show, but there was that really quick glimpse in episode 2 of season 8 where Bran was like, here's the Night King's motivations. He wants to erase all knowledge. Now that whole motivation is completely erased and doesn't matter. But it's this idea of that we see just in American Gods and Norse mythology by Gaiman, that the gods are being forgotten. The old gods are being forgotten, and their names aren't being repeated as much, and people aren't praying to them, so there isn't as much power. So is Melisandre keeping that alive for R'hllor? Is she, trying to sustain its power in the north where they don't exist? I don't know.
So I want to ask a question. I do not have the answer. And I love that video that you did where you talk about this, Quinn, regarding the truth about power and belief as being key to magic. But then what about Thoros bringing Beric back to life? Because Thoros was just like, I don't fucking know.
Yeah.
He's like casual. He's like casual R'hllor. He's culturally R'hllorist, right? And what about that?
Yeah, see that's kind of an anomaly. That's a harder one to think about, because it's like, see, maybe belief matters to some extent, but then maybe there are just fundamental things about their world that are the result. Maybe those specific words trigger something fundamental about the nature of their reality.
Well, and Thoros has that sword that obviously is false light as well. That's not Lightbringer. He just lights his sword up. Mm-hmm. That's it. I mean, there's no magic with that. That's when you get Melisandre's point of view and you learn about all these powders that cause her to create smoke to keep people thinking of how magical she is, and also to really play her up. I mean, that's a big thing right there. She straight up admits, not all of this is magic. Some of it is trick of the mind, making people believe I'm powerful. Thoros really is that first background piece of the flaming sword to kind of bring you to where Stannis is with Lightbringer eventually.
So if there is magic, right, there's got to be many different ways to kind of just tap into it, right? It can't all be the same. Like, there's got to be people all over the world that have found different ways to tap into it. And there's probably people that even tap into it accidentally, right? So that's an interesting way to think about it. There's probably people that have kind of built systems. Like, this is how you do certain things. Maybe like the Red Priest, or like the Warlocks of Karth, or the Undying. But then maybe there's kind of more wild forms of magic, like the wildlings that can war against stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. You got Varamir Six Skins with all of that, and the old gods. I mean, the old gods are really the most interesting to me because of that. They operate very similarly to Melisandre. We get that vision from Bran in Dance with Dragons when he's thinking of, the blood sacrifices of the Weirwoods. It's interesting to see kind of how they both align. They're very, very, very similar. And at the same time, the old gods do have a lot of falsity to them as well.
Yeah.
It's an interesting commentary that George makes on all religion, because you have people that do believe far too hard and they give themselves to their religion. And then you also see the corruption in the religion and where things can go wrong. We get a lot more of that in the Faith of the Seven, obviously, with the Faith Militant uprising and everything. But there's still a lot of that with R'hllor, especially from what we see in this internal POV.
Yeah. And then, on also another thing, too. Even those that practice magic and believe in whatever various gods, they don't actually know where magic comes from. That's one thing that I like to talk about, is that Melisandre believes maybe that her power is coming from R'hllor, because that's what she's been taught. But really, her magic could emanate from some ethereal place that she has no idea where it's coming from. She could be being manipulated by some entity that's beyond her, or just some other person that knows how to make her see things in the fire, or manipulate her vision in the fire. Because I just sense how uncertain she is. Like, she sees Bloodraven, and she thinks, is this the great other? And then she thinks, he sees me. He sees her through the fire, and it scares her so much that she starts bleeding. And then I interpret that as maybe like her kind of glamour faltering a little bit, or the spell faltering. Because like him looking at her was so intense of a fright, because she never expected that he could look at her through the flame.
And
why would she?
Yeah, exactly.
Are they all on that same exact that same exact wavelength? Are they all magic is on one wavelength is what that suggests, that they're looking at her through the weirwood and she's looking at them through the flames. So it suggests that there really is one sort of magical god or one sort of magical alignment, and they all are on it, and they just believe it has many different faces. The many-faced god, it's all facets of God.
And Varamir's death kind of hints at this in a way too, because he dies and his blood spills on the weirwood tree, and then his soul just kind of becomes everything. It just kind of becomes the tree and the forest and the dirt and the ground and the eagle and the worm in the ground and everything.
It all goes back to the ground, to the roots, to nature.
Mm-hmm. So it's like, so magic just seems like something that's intrinsic to their world, and it's something that different people tap into in different places and in different ways.
I know a lot of people were a little disappointed in Season 8, Episode 3 with the buildup of the Great Others and everything. I kind of was too, because of things like this from the book. I mean, magic is so... You can't just tell me that's it, that's how it was defeated, because there's all of this buildup of lore being needed to defeat the others, and the old gods, and Bran, and Bloodraven, and all these characters that are on this magical wavelength, and they need to do something to defeat the cold ones. I just feel like there's got to be some sort of answer. And, it's interesting. There's a Chinese mythology piece. Oh, what is her name? There is a character who is a god of water dragons, a goddess of water dragons. And her dragons cause the weather to change. And it's very, very, very similar to what we're seeing with Daenerys. She has these beautiful dragons that actually control the climate and control weather. So all of this magic has to have some common denominator that draws it together, is basically what this is telling me.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have much to add other than it reminds me of yes, disappointed with the end of the others, but like there's just nothing to say there. I'm like, I don't even want to think about it. I'm blocking it out. And I'm going to address many things. First off, controlling the weather. Is this the Pokemon cast form? Second, regarding the idea of magic, I like the idea that it's all in one wavelength. I also like that it's not predictable. Like, Melisandre doesn't know it to anticipate. We as the readers don't. And I remember reading a piece once, I think a blog post by N.K. Jemisin on the nature of magic. She's like, magic doesn't have to make sense, all right? If it did, it would be science. And she didn't say it like that. She obviously said it much more eloquently. But there's no rhyme or reason necessarily, and I think that's a difficulty. And as to that Thoros brings that up, he's like, nah, it doesn't work like that. I don't know why this happened. So I don't know where I'm going with that.
Do you think we're gonna get an answer to where it comes from by the end of the story? No, me either.
No,
I
definitely
hope not.
definitely not.
So people talk about how the Maesters want to eradicate magic. I know we're not talking about Melisandre, but it's okay. This is fine. So the Maesters want to eradicate magic, etc. And there are people who theorize that magic may be gone by the end of the story. So would it be strange if we don't find out where magic is from, yet magic still disappears entirely?
Mm-hmm. I think that is how it has to end, right? Like, we can't have magic left. Will there be dragons left? Probably not. Will there be direwolves left? Maybe not. Maybe they're all gone at the end. I don't think magic will be able to exist in that world once the others are eradicated, and obviously they are going to eradicate the others.
That's the thing. This is a shifting of the ages. This is a new age coming. This is like the kind of he's kind of doing the Tolkien thing. There's a new age coming about, and this is the children of the forest are dying, and they even say the direwolves will outlast us all, but then even their time will come to an end. So the age of magic is done. Like, their world is shifting into a new time. And then, You see that from the POVs, right? Because you see characters like Jaime, Catelyn, Ned, they all have to die. Cersei, they have to die because it's ushering in this new POV of all these younger heroes, the whole new age of heroes that we're about to deal with. Exactly. I was going to say, in the long view of history, these characters like Daenerys and Jon Snow are going to be viewed as the herald of a new age. So especially Daenerys. Like, people really, really underestimate, like, Daenerys' impact, I think. I know we've kind of gotten off Melisandre for a second. But especially Daenerys. Like, people severely underestimate the magnitude of what she did and how this will be looked at historically. Because this little Targaryen princess is the first to have dragons in a century, in over a century. She completely just kind of just turns the slave trade in the East on its head, takes over Marine and just sacks several cities in the span of months, takes over Marine, completely destabilizes everything. And if the prophecy is fulfilled, she will unite the Khalasars. It's similarly to what happened in the show, because it says in the House of the Undying that the crones bowed before her beneath the Mother of Mountains, and the only reason that would happen is if she, united the Khalasars. So the impact of what Daenerys did in the East, freeing all those slaves, this is going to be talked about for hundreds of years, right? Yeah. And then they're already calling her Misa, which has a million religious connotations.
The mother.
So,
she is the mother. I mean,
exactly.
That's her character. And you see characters like her. You have Jon as the kind of Azor Ahai mythos, and as other characters. Then you have Bran kind of with that last hero. His dog died, his sword broke, his friends died. And you have just all these characters. You have the Land the Clever kind of thing going on. All these characters are kind of mounting up to take these mythological roles. So I can respect that, especially with what the show is translating of that. But you really have R'hllor coming to Dany's plot, right? You have Moqorro following Victarion and coming to Dany. And when Dany comes to Westeros, her group of people, she has Marwyn the Maid, she has Moqorro, she has Tyrion. They're not a very good group of people, right? It's not the best PR team whatsoever.
No. But it's a great D&D team.
Sure is.
If you're gonna go on a quest.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just gonna move to the next topic, so you can say what you were gonna say.
I don't even know what topic we're on.
Yeah.
I'm following your lead. You are my captain, Quinn.
Okay, so I was gonna say, okay, let's talk about Melisandre's morality, right? Is she justified in doing what she is doing?
Hell yeah.
She's trying to save the world. Okay, give your take on it. Give your take on it, Chloe.
I think she's completely justified. I think from the outside, obviously, like we were saying, that whole Storm of Swords kind of summary paints her as a villain. Paints her as a little bit of a villain, which I'm here to set the record straight that once we get a Dance with Dragons, George obviously changed his mind somewhere along the way. He's done that a lot with the books, as we could tell. The Wind's a Winner. We're still waiting, George. We're getting there. I believe in you, buddy. But he's changed his mind a lot. That's the way the narrative goes. You have to make sure everything falls perfectly in line for this epic, fantastical ending. And Melisandre changed. She went from being kind of this two-dimensional fire witch to now she has an internal point of view where she straight up is telling you, I think I'm doing the right thing. I think I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, what my role is supposed to be in the Long Night. She sees it in the flames, but we know she doesn't always see the flames and interpret them properly. Her interpretations kind of lack a little bit. They leave a little desire for most of us to be proper. She sees, Stannis is right there, and she's like, Stannis is Azor Ahai, but why do they keep showing me snow when I look for Stannis in the flames?
Yeah. And then, George R. R. Martin has said that Melisandre is one of the most misunderstood characters in his book series. And I definitely think she is, but I also think that she is kind of she represents kind of like the problem with fanaticism. Like you just brought up how
heretics.
She's so certain that what she believes is right that she's unwilling to see the snow. That she's unwilling to see what is being shown to her, and she's interpreting everything from a very narrow lens. And that's why I think it's cool to kind of compare her with Moqorro.
Yeah.
Because Moqorro just tells Victarion what he sees.
Yes.
He doesn't put any spice on it. He doesn't put any flavor on it. He just said, this is what I'm seeing. And he just tells him what he's seeing instead of saying, I'm seeing this. So, like, for instance, Melisandre sees a girl on a horse and she says, this is Arya. Moqorro would just say, I see a girl on a horse. And then let Victarion make what he want of it.
No spin.
Exactly.
And I guess it's like Moqorro... Melisandre's cutting out that middleman to serve her own needs, right? Because you said Moqorro would just tell someone, this is what I see, and let them figure out what they want it to be. And that's very much how prophecy seems to work in the story. People are just told things, and they're like, it reveals more about the character by what they think the prophecy is. But anyway, yes, so Melisandre, as you said, just kind of jumps to conclusions, and she tries to like retroactively fit everything into that.
And I would argue it's to her, maybe it's not that she's jumping to conclusions in her mind. It's more like she needs an answer now.
Yeah.
The threat is a lot closer for Melisandre. Makoro's still on a goddamn boat. You know, he's like R'hllor, save us.
Boat.
He's on a boat. It's going fast, but Melisandre is at the wall. She sees these snows coming down. She sees Stannis being defeated as a possibility. She sees every single possibility of what could happen, whether she's translating it correctly or not, and she needs action now, in my opinion.
Yeah, the stakes are high, and we gotta remember too, like, Jon Snow is not listening to her. She's saying, "Beware the daggers in the dark," and he's just like, "Yeah, whatever."
Like, I've had sex with a couple redheads. I know how you people are, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So the stakes are very high for Melisandre. So it's like, we gotta go. I'm seeing some very ominous stuff in these flames right now.
Yeah, and she doesn't take the time to interpret them properly. She doesn't take the time to really think about them. She just says, this must be it, which I guess that's kind of how a lot of people's fan theories go, right? You read something and you're like, aha, this must be it.
I've never seen anyone do that ever in my life.
I see it every day. You're on Reddit.
What? No.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about this before, but it's like the Varys question too. We touched on this a little bit, like, where does power lie? Like, but with Melisandre, she kind of shakes this up a little bit, because very clearly she has real power that has nothing to do with, like, you can believe in it or you cannot believe in it. Like, still it works. So, like, that kind of, I feel like when you add magic into the conversation, Varys' whole thing gets a little shaky, right? Because when you've got someone that's got magic, I mean, to what extent, like, to some extent, your belief doesn't mean crap.
Right.
I guess magic is also just one of many forms of power, is how I see it, because power is, the way that I interpret it, especially after The Forsaken came out, I'm like, power is the ability to do things. And magic is one way to do that. Magic can be either a way to do things or a means in which to gain more different kinds of power in order to reach those ends.
Yeah. You know, in two, I think Varys is more talking about power from, like, kind of an abstract perspective. He's talking about it more abstractly, where it's like more literal forms of power. It's like, yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Well, and religion is the biggest theme when it comes to feast and dance, right? It's really prominent. We have Cersei dealing with the faith of the Seven and rearming them. Real smart move, Cersei. Good job. I think you did great.
Good job, team.
Nothing could go wrong with this. I don't know why you think it would.
Yeah, I agree. And, like, I think that's something that it's interesting that we get Melisandre's POV when we do. We get it in Dance, which was once one book with Feast. And that idea of religion and the socio-political power that comes behind it is something that is very much coming to the forefront of the story. And as you said, you see it with Cersei rearming the faith, but it's not just that. You see it even in Feast as the sparrows are beginning to bring their flock together. And it's something that George is definitely exploring further, or kind of trying to figure out his thoughts on, as you can see from the Dance of the Dragons, when he wrote all of that stuff more deeply with the shepherd in Fire and Blood. And you can also see the role that it plays, like, in the Iron Islands. Like, that's why Euron's so afraid of Aaron being out there, because Aaron was going around to different islands. He's like, you guys, we gotta throw Euron out. He's crazy. And there's real power in that, right? And Melisandre is trying to do that, but she doesn't have these built-in, like, cultural connections that allow her to just be like, hey everyone, you all already believe in this, and have these shared values, especially when your values are like, let's burn people. No one's about that. And so she has to use that spectacle to show that, yes, this is a different kind of power. This, you can do things. This is magic. And in creating those miracles and tapping into that, she's creating that faith. And that's why you're able to have, like, the Queensmen. You have Selyse, and through that, Stannis, and being able to marshal a different kind of power in order to stand against this quote unquote great other.
For sure.
Power comes from that belief.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then,
as you were saying.
yeah, I was going to say, like, the spectacle is just as important as what Melisandre can actually do as far as, like, you know, magical, actual, like, potential, right? Because, like, she needs to make men fear her and what she could do. Like, that is almost more powerful than what she could see in the flames, right?
Well, and it's that narrative, spinning a narrative and having other people believe it, and having so many people believe in it puts power behind that narrative, and it becomes the narrative that gets pressed, right? So having Stannis as the Azor Ahai figure to her, and her being wrong, means that all of her power is disregarded completely.
Yeah.
That's like, it's down the drain, it's gone. And as silly as it is, you get that power is power line in Game of Thrones, but it's power. People believe power resides where they see it reside. When her prophecies break, that's when Stannis's power breaks, right? He is completely wrapped up in her. So in the Winds of Winter, I'm sure we're going to end up seeing, you know, Davos is gone. He's aiding the whole thing with Rickon on Skagos. He's dealing with the unicorns, and Melisandre's prophecies are going to be proven wrong at some point. Stannis will break before he bends, as we know. It's right in the text. She wants people to believe, but does she believe?
That's it. Okay. I'm pretty sure she believes, but she also uses definitely her religion to manipulate.
Oh,
and
yeah.
she's been, ever since she came to Westeros, she's been slowly indoctrinating people. And I'm a huge fan of Dune. And Melisandre I've always said she could fit right in with the Bene Gesserit sisterhood. Because their whole thing is using religion to manipulate people. Like, their whole thing is they will, like, go to planets, like, hundreds of years earlier, put legends in place so they can come there later and manipulate people using the religions that form from the legends that they set in place. So it's like, yeah, so Melisandre definitely understands the power of using religion to control people. It was part of her game plan, clearly from the beginning. Go here, immediately start indoctrinating powerful people. And she really lucked out with Selyse.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But I'm thinking there's...
Sorry. I'm looking at the document.
I am who I am, and I will never change. I will never log off.
Oh my god. All right,
Quinn,
I'm sorry.
Quinn,
Carry
you
on.
like Dune, Quinn? I had no clue. I never guessed.
You'd like my boyfriend, he actually read the entire series.
Really?
Emmett's really jealous of your Dune shirt. All yesterday, he was like, "Man, that shirt he posted is so cool, babe. Are you gonna find it for me?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'll find it for you."
It's on Amazon. There was
yeah.
like a huge selection of Dune shirts.
Order
They're
them
super
now.
cheap.
So
I'm sorry, what were you talking
Back to
about?
religion.
You using religion to control people, etc. And the legends, that's where you were.
Yeah, and I was saying that Melisandre would fit right in with the Bene Gesserit sisters because she definitely sees the power of using religion to manipulate. That was part of her game plan from the time that she came to Westeros. It was like, we're gonna indoctrinate as many people as possible because she knows that as many people that are on her side, the easier time that she'll have. So she gets powerful people like Stannis, who doesn't fully believe, but she kind of lucked out with Selyse nevertheless.
Yes, and how could she not realize the power of religion in doing that when the religion that she was forced into, indoctrinated into, who knows, facilitates this great evil, right? Like, they, through their faith, have decided, yeah, we're going to enslave people and force them to be in temples.
also burn children.
Yes, this is what we do now. We are going to just torture people. And, like, of course she can see the power of religion if it forces or persuades people to do these kinds of things.
Well, and you see a lot of this in a lot of big epic fantasy works. Like, you see it in Discworld by Pratchett, you see it in Dune, and it just really interests me because with this false narrative, and when we see Stannis eventually break, obviously, and Melisandre's power exists on its own, not just as a facet of her lore, right? Like, we've learned that she has learned shadow binding, which, yes, while a lot of her lore has a lot to do with shadow binding, it's not the same. It's a very different magic. It's blood magic. It's dark magic. So her arc, even after Stannis breaks, possibly, and after her lore is shown, is like, haha, it's a fraud because it's just a religion. It's a face of power when power already exists. She still has that power. She'll still be able to make several stands with that power outside of the religion she's connected to.
Yeah. See, that's one thing. That's one thing that I always wonder about too. It's like without the religion, does she still have her power? Like, because she's always saying that this, I don't have any power. It comes from R'hllor. This is like R'hllor. This is R'hllor's power, and I'm just channeling it. But how true is that really? I mean, my thing is, I've always said that R'hllor could not be real, and there could still be fire magic. They could just be tapping into something, and then there's, because like I always say this too, like if magic was real in our world, there would be religions and gods built around that magic system, even if those gods were completely fake.
So it's kind of funny. I'm gonna go on a slight tangent because what you're saying, I know you watch the new Sabrina series. Chloe, are you caught up?
I'm still not, but it's okay. I'll just take my ears away. Go ahead.
Okay, take your ears away for like a hot few seconds. But like what you're saying is why I realized at some point when I was like, wait, if the devil's real in this universe, then that must mean like the story about the fall of Satan means that there was in fact a god and that must exist. And then like 2 seconds later it was like confirmed because they had like fucking angels and shit. But yeah, I agree. And it's worth noting that George himself has always said that he would not confirm the existence of gods in his universe. And I think that we should take that to very much mean that if George is agnostic about the gods in his universe, then we as the readers should be as well.
I completely agree. I 100% agree.
Chloe,
Because
do you want to come back?
Oh, I'm back. I was already there.
Oh, so you lied to me.
You know I don't care about spoilers. No, I don't. Like, we know this. Like, we know I sit there waiting for spoilers. It's what I live
That's
for.
true. That's
Spoilers
true.
are my blood magic.
I'm projecting onto you. I'm sorry.
I forgive you.
I was going to say the werewood trees too, right?
Yes.
So we've been told this entire time that these are the old gods, and that the old gods can watch us through these trees. But then the only thing we've ever seen watching through those trees is the children of the forest and Bloodraven. So it's like, how true was that ever, right? Maybe there never were any gods in the tree. Maybe these trees were just the children of the forest discovered at some point that they could use these trees to like live in after they died, and then that's all.
It feels like it's just kind of a misnomer because there definitely are belief systems or faiths in the real world that rest upon things like your ancestors have power, right? And they're not necessarily gods, but they're something. And I wonder almost if the old gods is just like a misnomer for that sort of power system, because clearly it seems like it was set up in such a way that maybe your ancestors could have gone in there, especially if you're a child of the forest, and definitely can do that.
Well, interestingly enough, we get that line in Catelyn 1 in A Game of Thrones where she thinks about the Godswood, how, Ned had built her a sept, but she thinks that the blood of the first men still flowed in the veins of the Starks, and his own gods were the old ones, the nameless, faceless gods of the Greenwood, where they shared with the vanished children of the forest. And they think about the Age of Heroes. You hear it in Bran 1, where he listens to old Nan telling him all these stories, and his dad telling the stories of the Age of Heroes and the children of the forest who disappeared. And like you were saying, Quinn, this is the new Age of the Heroes. They're coming back. We learned the children of the forest still exist, and we learned that it's literally just like slice your hand, here's some blood, and you can make some magic work, right? It's not, you don't... Belief is important to pass on the facade and the face for Melisandre of keeping those followers for Stannis and making sure that he is successful, but it's not required for her to perform magic.
Excellent point. It's just like magic. It's like there's rules. It's like when Mirri Maz Duur does what she does with Drogo, she's doing specific things. Like when Daenerys wakes up and she hatches her dragons, I'm convinced that she was given secret knowledge through her dreams, by the way. That's what I think about what was going on with Daenerys. But because when she wakes up, she does very specific things. Like, I mean, George is not going to say she laid the branches from ice to fire if that didn't mean something, right? And then she puts the eggs in very specific places, like at his head, at his heart, at his groin. And then there's just like so much symbolism in that chapter that it seems like she woke up and she just kind of had knowledge, and she did a very specific set of things to get a result, right? There was a transaction that was going on there.
So that kind of reminds me of chakras, right? Like things we hear about in different meditative type of beliefs and religions these days. And that reminds me, she's placing these at power points of the body. She's placing it at the groin, which we see obviously having sex creates magic for her and creates shadows. That's really interesting to think about, just like that the chakras of the body and of the mind are really important when it comes to this.
Big dick energy.
That is big dick energy.
That's what it is. It's a big dick energy.
Are you saying there's a big dick involved here?
Wait, are we not talking about Drogo right now?
I mean, I guess, yeah, that's big dick energy. Drogo's probably huge. You're right.
Now, speaking of Drogo, though, that's a good jumping off point. you know, like Melisandre is like she's always talking about king's blood, right? Mm-hmm. What's so special about king's blood? And like, what makes someone have king's blood, and how far does that go, right? Because you would think that at a certain point it would be diluted to the point where it was like, does the king's blood really work? Because it's like so Edric Storm, she wants to kill him because he's Robert Baratheon's bastard son, right? But like, let's say like Edric Storm had a son, and then his son had two sons, and then that son's son married a woman, and
Doesn't
they had
matter.
a baby. Would that baby still have king's blood?
Well, and there's that power is power, right? It's saying you're a king. Anyone can say, "Look at me, I'm the king." Look at Renly.
That's exactly how I think it works too.
Yeah,
right?
I low-key am just like, I don't think, yeah.
It's not It's not so literal as it's like literally the blood, but it's like there's power in like a bunch of humans getting together and saying, "This is our ruler. This is our king." There's power in that worship, and but here it's kind of a more like kind of abstract kind of interpretation of it. It's like bleeding into the more like kind of esoteric realms, you know. I mean, if that makes any sense. I'm getting kind of woo-woo.
It does, and it reminds me of, in different pagan religions, there's all of the thought of like bloodletting. Blood sacrifice isn't really what they use, it's more ritual bloodletting, and that's kind of more appropriate in that context, which is, like cutting someone's flesh to create a bond or a pact with a spirit. So I think George took a lot of that, like a sexual partner's flesh in ritual or ceremony is a big thing, a ritual cutting of an animal, marking a person, cutting oneself to blood to a specific deity. I think blood is really what's important in the idea of people believing in someone's blood, so believing in the Baratheons after they retook, that throne from the Targaryens, and them having that Targaryen blood, so maybe it's linked with Targaryen blood necessarily. As we know, they have been the ones to have special powers in riding dragons and Valyrian blood in general, so... But the Baratheons just don't have as much, obviously, as, like, if you took Viserys, for example, and just, like, cut that bitch open, blood him out, you'd probably, like, make a bunch of shadows, have a shadow party. But, I think it's the power of people believing in it, and all of that collective kinetic energy of that belief in that person makes it, I don't know, maybe that's what provides and propels that magic.
See, yeah, that's a really interesting concept. And a lot of authors that I read, like, mess around with, like, the power of belief. Like, so It by Stephen King is one of my favorite books, right? And that's one of the main themes of that entire book. It's like their belief in the creature and what it can do to them that kind of fuels its power. So that's very interesting. So like spoilers for anybody that didn't see the most recent episode. But yeah, what did you guys think about the ending, the way they handled Melisandre? Or just how they handled Melisandre in that entire episode, since this is like the last we're going to see of her?
I think they handled her decently well. I would give them like a 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10, and hey, that's a passing grade, so they should be happy they're getting that from me. That's a bit generous, but hey, and I was a very good C student for a while, so they can be too. I think they did well. I think obviously the retcons that they wrote in for Melisandre and the whole like, not today, I get it. It's cheesy. It's for the fans of the show. Whatever. I get it. You got to make money. We all got to get our food. We got to get our dollar. So good for David and Dan. But I get it. Get your dollar. Get your McDouble. But I loved the way she ended. I think it was obvious that like Melisandre's power is faltering, and I think we're going to see something similar in the book that, once Stannis breaks, once she loses that power, because I mean, as much as she's propping Stannis up, he is propping her up as well by keeping her relevant and by keeping her at his side as his left-hand woman, as his Mary Magdalene, pretty much. She this power, like, she loses it, and you see it when she's unable to light the trenches fully, when she's just like over and over again repeating her prayer. You see it, and you see her, you know, almost falter and almost break, but she uses the last of her power. She takes off her glamour, and she falls into the snow. And that shot of her falling, A, relatable. I've been that tired before. B, I think that was probably one of the best shots and the most, I don't know, just this, like, beautiful bringing together of her character in the end. You know, she united ice and fire, quote unquote, and she whatever that meant, I guess it wasn't important, but
right.
Whatever. But she, in the end, she went out doing what she could against the long night, and she knew that, like, she had a role to play, and she showed up and played her role, and kind of, they're lucky if she did, obviously, but
I wonder if it's her power faltering or just like how it goes, because that was kind of how it was, right, when she was trying to resurrect John, and she just says the words over and over, and she's like, this isn't working, and then she leaves, and she's like, I did a bad job, and then she did a good job, turns out. Here he is. But regarding how she actually goes out, I think it's interesting to consider in the context of the chapter that we have just read, because for her to finally decide to give up her life after this battle, it shows that she feels that her purpose for having been on this world is done, especially when you see what she has done throughout the episode, and it very much paints her as a true believer, and really shores up the things that we see in this chapter of, like, oh, she's not just manipulating Stannis even though she was wrong. She really believed all these things and was driving towards this bigger goal of wanting to save everyone.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I know some of my friends didn't like the Melisandre ending, but, like, I really appreciate it. I thought it made total narrative sense, because it's like her whole thing has been about fighting the others. And if you just look at what they've been doing in the show for the past several seasons, when she takes up that ruby in season 6, you can see it on her face. She looks tired. She just seems like she's been fighting for so long.
Same.
And she's been holding on for so long. And at the end of it, she was finally allowed to die. And all the stuff with her lighting the fires, lighting the oryx was really cool. Lighting the trench was really cool. Even though it amounted to basically nothing, but it looked cool. It looked cool. And then when she was, like, chanting, trying to light the trench, I'm, like, chanting with her, like, yes, light this shit. Like, get it done. Yes.
Why didn't we all chant that?
Yeah.
I don't know. Eliana and I were together, yeah.
Yeah. And then I thought it did kind of give her some pause, I thought. Because the way I interpreted that was, like, she's in the presence of the great other, so his power is there too. So it's like she's not only having to call on R'hllor, but she's having to fight off the great other. But then maybe that's just me giving them too much credit. Like, that's the way I would have written it. But, you know, yeah.
There's a lot of different things we would have done.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to tell yourself that, you know, this is happening in your head. Like, this is why they're doing it, and that gets us all through the show. So
It gets us all through the show.
Yeah.
For
You're
sure.
like, this is fine, and the flames around you are the ones that Melisandre made. You're the dog, the little dog, going, this is fine.
Yep. No, she had a great ending, though, and I think that her show ending, because she's not going to live till the end, let's be real. We all know she won't.
Yeah.
It's not possible, but I think we'll see
Fire
her
consumes.
end. Fire does consume, and we'll see her end. We'll see her consumed, and that's how I felt about her ending. I felt fire consumes, and that's what happened to her. She went out like a boss. She used the end of her magic to save our protagonists, and she kind of redeemed herself in the process, right? Obviously, no one will ever forgive her for that awful episode when she put our poor baby Marshmallow in the fire. But she made us s'mores.
Probably canon.
It is canon. Let's be real. We know she gonna do it. She gonna do it.
Yeah.
Like, together with Stannis, you know? I like
But,
to
like,
canon.
chill, Davos, though. Like, chill. She helped.
Yeah.
Like, go back in the
Yeah.
castle.
Yeah, that was silly. That was a silly end to that, in my opinion, for sure. With Davos with the knife out, he wouldn't have done that. He would have given her a Stannis nod, in my approval. My headcanon is he watches her go out into the snow and she turns back and looks at him and he gives her a Stannis nod and just is like, go on, do your duty.
Yeah. I'm like, come on now. She redeemed herself. Like,
But-
really?
Yeah, enough. She did enough.
I agree, but at the same time, I wonder if that is in keeping, because when we were talking about the differing moralities of, like, is Melisandre right or not, the opposing view to all of that is Davos's perspective, right? And maybe he does try to stick to his duty, whether that's what we think it should be or not. And he doesn't, in the fact that he like goes against Stannis's wishes, but what he thinks is like this objective morality, and whether that means punishing Melisandre right then and there upon seeing her or not, the same way that he thinks even if the fate of the world is at stake, we can't kill this boy. That's in and of itself wrong.
Right, there's that idea of what's one boy, and that's the idea that Davos shoots right back. Yes, what's one boy?
Everything.
So that's a good point. And that's kind of like a Star Trek concept, right? Like the needs of the many and the needs of the few and all that jazz. Even though they kind of contradicted several times later on, but whatever, who cares?
YOLO.
Right. But it harkens back to Tywin, right? With that, like, what's wrong with me killing one man instead of thousands? And everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it reminds me since I brought up Star Trek, it reminds me of one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek. It's called I, Borg. It's in Star Trek: The Next Generation. Basically, the Borg are like this horrible, hive-minded, unstoppable threat, greatest threat the Federation ever faced. So they capture one, but then this one he starts to develop personality and he starts to become an individual. And so Picard has to make the decision: do they create this virus and send him back and kill all the rest of them? And so Picard says, like, does his individuality matter more than destroying the Borg threat? And so that's kind of similar.
Yeah, absolutely.
How does it end?
Well, I mean, it's Picard, so of course he's like, no, I can't kill this individual. So, you know, that's why Picard's my dude. That's why he's one of the greatest television characters of all time.
I get you. I'm a Data girl, but I get you.
Oh, you know, Data's my guy too.
Yeah, Data's that bitch.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So yeah, that's been our Melisandre discussion. Yeah. Even though there was a little bit more with Melisandre, we kind of skirted around on a bunch of different concepts. But that's the thing about A Song of Ice and Fire. You can't just talk about one thing.
No way.
Because everything is tied into everything else. So you kind of have to go on these tangents.
Well, yeah, and that's the point of Melisandre, right? Like, she's not just about her plot. Everything she does is going to have actions towards the end game.
For sure. So, Chloe, Eliana, tell the people where they can find you.
All right. Well, thank you again for having us. This was a blast. We should do this again soon. We'll have to get you on. You can find me at my blog at liesandarborgold.com, or you can find me on Girls Gone Canon. Every week we put out a book episode, and we're currently covering the show as well, doing our duty to review the season. And we are actually starting a new series soon, so not going to say anything because Eliana will murder me, so look out for that.
Big or small, we must do our duty. Chloe.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm Davos standing in the door with a knife.
Oh my god. Does this mean you're gonna kill me? What the fuck?
No, the point is I don't.
Oh, right. You let me go do my duty. That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Am I gonna die?
Eventually.
We all do.
Comes for us all in the end. And I'm Eliana, and you might know me as Glass Table Girl on the Song of Ice and Fire subreddit. You can find me on Maester Monthly, or together on Girls Gone Canon with Chloe, or as Arithmetric on Twitter, because I decided that brand cohesion was not important.
All right, it was great having both of you on. I'm looking forward to having you on at some time in the future. If you guys like this podcast episode, make sure you like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Also, make sure to check out the Girls Gone Canon podcast. If you want to support this channel, click the Patreon link. Thank you guys so much for listening.